not working? Ah, great. Hello, everybody. We are in the midst of technical difficulty. I'm sure it will be resolved momentarily. There we go. Technical difficulty solved. I was right again. Okay, so the name of this session is Mastering the Salesforce CLI. I've got 20 minutes. You have questions. That'll probably leave me with 15 minutes. And I believe firmly that anything that you can master within 15 minutes might not be worth mastering. That is to say that you will not end up masters of the CLI after this session, but what I hope to do is put you on the road to mastery, give you some tips and tricks, things that you need to focus on so that you can become a master of the CLI. My name is Dave Carroll. I am a product manager at Salesforce on the Salesforce CLI, as it turns out. You can catch me with my email and my Twitter handle above. Because I have so little time, we're going to go ahead and take care of the required stuff first. This is our forward-looking statements. I know that this isn't the first time you've heard this, but make all your buying decisions based on already released product and not any forward-looking statements that I may make. Okay, so if we're going to become masters of the CLI, the first thing we need to do is really understand what the CLI is. And I'm going to give you a description of the CLI that is no marketing, no equivocating. This should clearly define what the CLI is, starting with it's a command line interface. The implication is that it's an interface that you use on the command line of a terminal. So no, really, what is it, though? It's an aggregation of multiple of our APIs. We've got SOAP APIs, we've got REST APIs, we've got metadata APIs, bulk APIs, what did I miss? Tooling APIs. We have a lot of APIs here at Salesforce, and understanding which ones to apply in which use cases can be very difficult. So the CLI has embedded these, or is taking advantage of these APIs for the specific use case of enabling your development process, your continuous integration and deployment as well. It also has the ability to manage authentication tokens for you. So one of the hard things with having 20 dev sandboxes is managing all the logins for that stuff. Somewhere you've got those stored. Hopefully it's very secure, but you never know. So we take care of all of this for you. We also move metadata. This is kind of the primary use case. There's some other things that the CLI can do, but we're moving source and metadata between environments. And this is the whole concept of deployment, right? You go from source and you deploy it to a scratch org, you deploy it to a sandbox, ultimately you deploy it to production. That's what the CLI brings to the table. The other thing we do is we support the development experience by allowing you to create certain types of metadata directly from the CLI. This is Apex code, Visual Force, Lightning components. We can create a skeleton of all of those metadata types. We also have some utility functions, create user, open org, generate password. All of these things can be used in the CI/CD process as well. But the most important part about the CLI is it's built to be scriptable and invocable, right? If it was not scriptable, then it would be very tedious to run through all the steps to do your CI and your automation from the terminal all the time. Invocable means that you can invoke it from different languages. So any modern language worth its salt today can execute a system command. I've got that on the third bullet, last bullet here. You can see there's a command in Python to execute a CLI command. The next one is Go. There's a command, there's a way to implement the command in Go. And so that means that you're not limited to just a shell to do your scripting. You can use other applications, other languages to do your scripting. But there's a couple of other cases. So interactive is the most obvious case. You sit at your terminal and you start typing commands. I think the first time that you do this, it's a little bit magical because we've removed everything except you and the minimum interface to your application, to the OS, right? It's actually, I've not scripted for a very, very long time. And when I started, I just couldn't get enough. It was like the first computer science class I took. Wow, I can make this machine do whatever I tell it to do. This is pretty awesome. But scripting is definitely the thing that you want to focus on as you're mastering the CLI. Right, looking at the countdown timer. Okay, so I'm going to start off with a scripting demo. Let me just get a show of hands. How many Bash scripters are there? Great, fantastic. This is going to be primarily focused on the Mac or Unix is very similar. Windows has the same concepts. The syntax might be slightly different, but this whole concept of mastering the scripting environment also applies to Windows. So, what can we do with scripts? Well, one of the things that we can do is create aliases. So, I'm going to make this a little bigger. Let's just say that we want to do sfdx force org list. This is great. I can see all the orgs that I have set up in this particular project, but I get tired of typing that. As a matter of fact, I'll give you how lazy I am. I've created an alias called sfdc that translates to sfdx because I'm constantly typing that instead of sfdx. But anyways, so there's the command. Let's create an alias for it. I'm going to bring this back to the top. Alias org list equals, and then all we do here is type in the command. Force org list. Okay, nothing happens, but when we go ahead and type in org list, now it's executing the command. So that's way easier to type. It's easy to remember. If I wanted to, I could include some flags, flags that I use frequently, and so on. So let's try another command. Let's do, have you ever done sfdx force force source status? Okay, you can see backspacing. It's the bane of the scripter's existence. So there's my status. Rather than do that, maybe I want to create an alias called sStatus for source status. Oops. And then here's the other trick. I dislike typing so much, I'm just going to copy and paste it from something else I've done before. Okay, so now if I do sStatus, you can guess what's going to happen. I'm going to execute that status command. Right, so we could do this with push and pull. The reason why we can do this with push and pull, why it's an obvious thing, is because we have the ability to set a default user. That makes it simple. We don't have to pass any arguments to the command. But what if we do want to pass arguments to our alias? We can't really do that super easy. And so instead, while you're scripting, it's good to think of functions that you can create within your scripting environment. Something's hollering at me. That's OK. So let's bring it back to the top. I'm going to create a function called user. And basically, I'm going to do sfdx force config set. And I want to set the default username. And then I'm going to put in some special syntax that references an argument that might be passed to this function. It's called $1. The $sign expansion is an array of arguments. $0 is the function itself. And the first argument passed to it is $1, the second is $2, and so on. So I'll go ahead and do that and close this out. And now, let's just do a quick org list so that I can see a different user to switch to. So I'm going to do user org 1. And then if I org list one more time, you can see I've easily created a shortcut to switch between Scratch orgs within my environment. Now, this applies to scripting as well, because you may have a couple of Scratch orgs that you spun up because you want to run some tests in one and some tests in the other. It's good to switch them back and forth. You can always type out the whole script and do -u and target the org that you want, but that's available to you. Okay, so the problem with this is I've defined some aliases, I've defined some functions. As soon as I end this shell session, all of those definitions go away. I've lost them all, and now I have to redefine them or something else. So we have a solution for that. The solution for that is called a profile, right? So on the, whoa, look at that. Let's do this. Cancel. I got a bunch of stuff. This is not a good place to be. Sing and dance. Here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to open this somewhere else so we could look at it. File, open. This is really small for my old eyes. Go back and see if this has made any progress. No. Okay, I have another solution. I'm going to escape out of that. I'm going to go over here, force quit. We're quitting Sublime Text. Go away. Now we'll reopen Sublime. Probably should have done that first. Okay, close that. Okay, so this is what a bash profile looks like. It's essentially just a script, but it's a script that's run every time you start a new session in your shell. That's fine. Okay, and so here you can see those aliases. Let me make that bigger. Those aliases that I created previously through the command line, I've also got in my script. Is it getting bigger? Okay, and then what I really want to focus on, though, is this org delete function down here, because this has some really basic yet important scripting concepts that you'll need to understand. So before I do that, let me go ahead and show you how that works. So I've got like org 1 through 7, test 1 through 7. I want to delete those. So I can do org delete, and I have a couple of options. I could do 0. Well, no, the script is checking to make sure that I pass in a user or an org name. So let's go ahead and do org 2. This is great, so it's going to delete org 2. So now that script can delete a single org. Fantastic. I see everybody's jumping up and down. But we can also do org 3, org 4, org 5, org 6, and so on. And so that allows me to clean up my workspace in one line of code. Pretty simple. So we'll just wait for this to finish. These deletes, by the way, you see how fast that came up? They're working in parallel. So there's some ways to combine your commands so that they launch in different sub-processes of the shell, and then you gain some speed. It takes basically a little longer than the longest command that you're executing, no matter how many there are, which is pretty cool. Okay, so back to the shell script. How does that work? Okay, first of all, I'm defining the script. You've seen that when I did it interactively. And then we're inspecting this variable. I told you the $ kind of represents, at least in the context of a function, the value of a variable or the arguments that are passed to it. This one is looking at the number of arguments that are in the argument list passed. And if it's 0, then we need to do something. If it's 1, then we go ahead and we take the first argument from that array of arguments, and we pass it to the delete command. So you can see we've got if-then. If you're used to programming in something like JavaScript, you get to end your ifs with phi, very symmetric, right? If and then phi, pretty interesting. Also, it's very important in these expression evaluations. You need to have these spaces. It really matters. You can bang your head against the wall for a long time because you forgot to add a space in that kind of expression. So the next thing that we're going to do in this is we're going to demonstrate another aspect of mastering the shell script, and that is we're going to take and run the orglist command, and we're going to redirect the output to a file called orglist.json. All right? We don't have to do this, but I wanted to include this way of doing it just so that you could see that any output can be directed to a file. You might want to do some logging or something like that. In this case, we're getting the JSON output. The next thing we're going to do is we're going to loop through the results of that org list. So there's a great program that works on Windows and it works on Mac and Linux too called JQ. And JQ provides a mechanism by which, from the command line, you can parse JavaScript. So in our org list, we have a result, and within that result, we have an array of scratch orgs. So I'm going to iterate over that array of scratch orgs, pulling the alias out of each one of those scratch orgs. Once I'm in there, I'm also going to iterate over the arguments that were passed to the command. These are the org names that I wanted to delete. And $@ is a special character that basically takes all the arguments and turns them into an array. So then, once I'm going through that array, then I can just compare the alias that is in row and the org name that is an item, see if they're the same, and then go ahead and run the command to delete them. I'm also appending this ampersand. So you can string commands together using various kind of connective tissue. One is a semicolon. That means execute this command, and when that's done, execute the next command. The ampersand means execute this command and then execute the other command. Don't wait for the first one to execute. Right, and so then finally, at the end, I'm cleaning up after myself. I'm removing my orglist.json and then exiting the function. So I think I might just make it in time. You're all feeling like masters right now? Okay, so what should I script? How do I know when something should be scripted? Well, being lazy is one reason. It's good, right? Nothing wrong with that. I think laziness has been responsible for more invention than any other human trait. But if two or more commands are frequently executed in sequence, that might be worthy of a script. If you want someone else to execute commands in the same order, that someone else could be your CI system, could be Travis, right? I want Travis to do these commands. I'm going to give it a script. I want to check this script in with my repo for my Salesforce source so that every developer, when they download the repo, they execute these commands, maybe to set up and configure the repo. That might be script-worthy. If your command sequence needs conditional branching, result parsing, I think the best way to do that is in a script. So, a couple of resources available. If you want that bash script I showed you, I've published a public gist called DC Bash on Bitly. This is not the end-all, be-all. And by the way, there is no one way to program the shell. You'll find many opinions as you're out there Googling about how things should be done, but that's okay. Whatever works for you is good. The second link is a video recording from Trailhead DX by one of our engineers, Thomas Dvorak. And what he's done in this video is giving you a bunch of other tips and tricks like this for working from the command line. Don't forget the Trailhead. We've got a lot of Trailhead projects for you around DX. None of them really refer to what we're talking about here, but they do show you how to use the command line, give you more information about DX. And with that, I'm right on time. I'd like to say thank you for coming. Thank you for